That was the ultimate Cleveland sports show animation, but this is the ultimate Cavaliers show. Mikey McNuggets, Jason Lloyd as always. In studio today, it is Wednesday, June 19th. We have no full UCSS show, Jason, because it is Juneteenth, which Tegna recognizes as a holiday. So we're taping this on Tuesday the 18th, but you are watching it on the 19th. If anything breaks between 1:17 Tuesday and 11 a.m. Wednesday, we will have hopped in and done a separate stream, so bear with us. But Jason, we have a couple big things I want to hit on today on this Ultimate Cavs show, and we start with lessons the Cavs can take away from the Celtics, who just won the NBA championship. They beat the Mavs 4-1. They beat the Cavs 4-1. They swept the Pacers. They beat the Heat 4-1. They are your champions. They went 80-20 or 81-20 or 80-21 this year. Statistically, the best team in basketball, start to finish. What can the Cavs take away from how Boston will reach the level they're at and the way they play that maybe they could implement to their own team for roster construction for next season and style of play?
Well, the biggest headline actually to me is patience, perseverance pays off. And, you know, go back to the Orlando series. I was talking to someone with the Cavs before that series ended who said basically if we lose this series, we're running it back. We're keeping this thing together, and we're going to run it back. And one of the teams that he pointed to was Boston. That, you know, they've been together for 7 years. The Cavs haven't been together. This was only year 2 if you count since Donovan arrived. This is only their second year together. It took Boston 7 years with Jalen and Jason Tatum together to win a championship. So they want to see this thing through and see what this group can do. Now, obviously, one of the big differences is Jason and Jalen are 6'6" and 6'8", whereas the Cavs are, I don't know if the match is really quite the same. You can do anything in the NBA when your two best players are 6'6" and 6'8". You can really switch and be creative with your lineups. The Cavs really don't have that luxury, but I understand the sentiment of, hey, let's see this thing through. And the patience for Boston paid off because there was a lot of talk the last couple of years of they don't work well together. You got to break them up. You got to break them up. You got to break them up. And where are we this summer? All the talk all summer long is you got to break it up. You got to break it up. You got to break it up. Boston resisted that, and it paid off for them this summer. And we'll see what the Cavs decide to do.
I don't disagree, but I want to push back on part of that because although it is Tatum and Brown who are the two centerpieces of the Celtics championship, their front office, Brad Stevens and whoever took over for Danny Ainge, I think Stevens is actually the GM, right?
Yeah, he is.
They were aggressive as hell this past offseason, trading away Marcus Smart for Kristaps Porzingis. Marcus Smart, by the way, was a fan favorite in Boston, an absolute heart and soul of the team kind of player for that Celtics organization. And then they traded Rob Williams, Malcolm Brogdon, and 2 first-round picks to get Drew Holiday. Now, it is not every day that a Drew Holiday caliber player gets put on a platter for you and he gets traded to a team in the Dame Lillard trade. And then that whole consequence, Milwaukee essentially gifted the Celtics a championship by trading for Dame Lillard. But they were not afraid to shake up the ancillary pieces of their core. Their foundation was always the two J's, Tatum and Brown. But then they made some pretty aggressive decisions this offseason, Jason, because they looked at the roster and said, we're not good enough in the backcourt, and we don't have enough scoring from the 5 position and spacing, and Porzingis can unlock an entire new facet of our offense. And they made those trades. And I'm not quite sure if you're looking at the Cavs and their quote-unquote core 4, who the 2 pillars are. You know one's Mitchell. The other one could be Darius. It could be Evan. I guess theoretically speaking, it could be Jared Allen, but I think he's on a different pedestal than the other 2. And the Celtics made an ancillary trade to get better at the other positions. I'm just curious if the Cavs look at this and on the one hand say, yeah, maybe patience is the right way to go, Jason. On the other hand, they go, well, hell, maybe we do have to be more aggressive to bring in more top-end talent that fits better. It's not that Marcus Smart wasn't a good player. It's not that Malcolm Brogdon and Robert Williams weren't good players. They just didn't fit as well as a cohesive unit as the Celtics did with Porzingis and Drew Holiday now.
I think the gap between Boston's 2 best players and then the other guys you're talking about was wider than the Cavs gap.
100% agree.
And for that reason, it's hard to pull apart which one is the piece that we can move off of easily if you're the Cavs. Obviously, Donovan's number 1. He's at the top of that list. But beyond that, I'm not sure who you look at as number 3 and number 4 we can live without. I think in my mind it's Jarrett. I think Jarrett is the most tradable of that group. But I understand I don't disagree with you because, again, when your 2 best pieces are 6'6" and 6'8", and they're at the level that those guys are, those two guys are at a different level than any of the Cavs guys in terms of a two-piece meal there. So, but I think the Cavs would have a hard time discerning who is piece 3 and who is piece 4 that we could break off. In my mind, it's Jarrett. And beyond that, I don't think you need to break up the backcourt. We've talked about it. I'm on record. I don't know if you really need to break it up. If you do want to move off a piece, I think it's more important to break up the front court than the backcourt.
I 100% agree with you on that. I've come to the conclusion that unless you're getting another all-star player for Darius, it doesn't make sense to trade him for 2 quarters. They're 2 50-cent pieces for $1. I just don't think that makes sense. But another thing I think the Cavs can learn from the Celtics, and it goes back to the way they drafted, and Danny Ainge, because he was drafting at the time, went against the grain, taking Brown and Tatum as opposed to point guards when that was the run of point guards. Markelle Fultz was number 1. Lonzo Ball was number 1. Ben Simmons, who's a wing but is really a point guard. Like, those were the guys that went first in the draft. The Celtics went against the grain at 3 and went big wing over small guard, which was not the norm. The way Boston plays basketball, Jason, is the perfect encapsulation of modern-day basketball. They have 5, and it's 4.5 when Horford's in for Porzingis, but for the sake of this, let's count Porzingis the center because he was the starting center. They have 5 shot creators on the court at all times. 5 guys that with 3 seconds on the shot clock, if they have the ball, you say, okay, at least we're going to get a halfway decent look. Maybe 5 seconds, not 3. They have 5 guys who can create not just for themselves but for others. They have 5 guys who can shoot threes, which means the court is completely spaced at all times unless they decide to attack a post-up opportunity. In Boston, despite having 5 3-point shooters on the court, Jason, ran the 2nd most post-ups in basketball this year. Behind only Denver, and that's because Jokic led the NBA in post-ups. Philly would have surpassed them because Embiid's number, but he missed a chunk of the season. They posted up Tatum. They posted up Brown. They posted up Porzingis. They posted up White. They posted up Drew Holiday, who had the 2nd most post-ups of anyone on their team. They are so spaced, it forces the defense to be spaced, which opens up driving lanes, which their shot critics can attack. And then on defense, they had 5 guys who they just switched. They just said, you know what? We're going to switch everything. And I thought Joe Mazzulla, who we have had our conversations, I don't think he's a great head coach, but I thought he did some really smart things in the playoffs. They had 5 guys on the perimeter that could switch. So you have 5 shot creators, 5 shooters, and 5 guys who can switch on defense. That is the epitome of modern-day basketball. And when I look at the Cavs roster, and let's just use their starting 5 from last year for the sake of this, Jason, how many shot creators do they have? 2?
Yeah.
How many shooters do they have?
Do you count Max Strus as a shooter? Then 3.
How many guys do you feel comfortable switching on defense on anything?
1.
The jury rests its case.
Yeah. I didn't know about the post-ups thing because I'm playing through – because, again, I'm going to go back to the Cavs championship, like the championship teams. They space the floor to drive and kick, not necessarily to post. I mean, it was Kevin on the elbow at the start of games.
They did it to drive and kick, but if Kyrie Irving was guarding Jason Tatum, that's a post-up.
Yeah, well, yeah. I'm just thinking back, like, it was always LeBron get to the lane, either go to the basket or kick to a shooter. It wasn't necessarily creating post-ups. That's just really interesting to me. I just wonder, going forward, I guess there's no right or wrong way of doing it. It's just different ways to cut to. I don't know. It's just I never thought of that. I'm processing this in real time.
And it forces the defense to be strategic in their matchups as well. And one of the things that Dallas tried to do defensively to Boston was they didn't want to switch a big onto the guards, so they tried to cross mismatch. And then when you cross mismatch, well, then they're just going to take you to the post. And they're going to take your worst defender to the post. And they don't run. Listen, the amount of post-ups the Celtics run does not equate to the amount of post-ups Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was running in the 70s. It is the 2nd most in today's day and age of the NBA, which is a very different number than it is in the past. Yeah. But that was a mismatch they utilized on defense. And from the Celtics standpoint, when you could switch on everything, instead of putting Porzingis on Derek Lively, they were putting Jaylen Brown on Derek Lively or Jason Tatum. So when the Dallas Mavericks tried to do pick and rolls with their big man who they killed Minnesota with, and they killed OKC with those lobs. Well, now you're switching to Luka's on Jason Tatum. Yeah. And Jaylen Brown's now guarding your big, and it's the perfect epitome of modern day basketball. And it made me go back to think to that Cavs series. And we talked about it on the show a little bit, Jason, how the Celtics just played with their food. And the question was, well, hey, did the Cavs give them the toughest series that anyone gave Boston this postseason? And I think you can make an argument that the case is yes. But nothing was really close. And I think the 4-1 result in the 2 games later in that series don't actually represent the gap between where Boston is and where the Cavs were in reality. And I think we're going to go into the summer. You can spin it saying, hey, we were right there. I don't think Cleveland is right there.
It's hard to say because, well, so much is going to change because you fire the coach, you're going to have a whole different identity.
I'm just saying as we go into this, how close were they? Like, were they just one move away or was there a significant gap? I think the gap was bigger than some people want to give it credence to because the final scores of that series look closer than the actual.
Yeah, I mean, the Cavs played their asses off in that series, and they were down so many key pieces. I do think that there's a wide. I mean, I thought going into the year, I thought it was Boston, Milwaukee, and then everybody else in the East. I kind of still think that way. Obviously, if Milwaukee's at full strength, it could be a totally different outcome this year. But yeah, I do think that there's a gap that the Cavs have to close, and they're running out. They don't have a lot. Unless, obviously, if you break off one of your pieces, Jared Allen or whoever, they don't have a lot of draft picks to trade. They do have the first-round pick this year. They don't have a lot of avenues to close that gap unless they break off one of their key pieces. And
last thing, then we'll move on to the next segment of this show, Jason, is they lost 4-1 in the playoffs. They lost the regular season series. The one game they won in the regular season, Boston was up 20 points in the fourth quarter. Then Dean Wade became white Jesus and single-handedly carried them back into the game. I just think, and it's not even a knock on the Cavs. I would say the same thing about the Pacers, the Heat, and the Mavericks. When Boston wanted to play and they turned it on, they were the best team in basketball this year, and it wasn't close. And the most frustrating part about Boston in the grand scheme of the picture is they just decided, and they had the switch. We talk about, hey, can they flip the switch when it's time? They had their finger on the switch at all times during the season. They'd flip it, they go up 25.
And they shut it off.
They take it off, it'd be a 10-point game. They flip it, they win by 19.
Remember when you were a kid, you just flipped the switch off?
Yes, that is the Celtics. So the Cavs, they have moves to make. They will improve in free agency or via trade. They're going to hire a new head coach that will hopefully unlock part of this offense, and we'll see how close they can get to the Celtics next year. But I do think there are some tangible basketball philosophical outlooks and team-building strategies the Cavs can take into this offseason based off how Boston just put together a championship run.
We'll see. It's a big offseason. Obviously, it starts with Donovan and Evan extensions. They can start talking now. I think that that's probably going on now. I don't think it'll be very long before there's an announcement on both. And the one that's curious to me is Isaac Okoro, and we'll see how that plays out. We'll
spend 1 minute on Isaac Okoro. We're going to skip most of that and get to the what-ifs. But would you pay more than $50 million for Isaac Okoro? If some team offers him 4 for $55, would you match?
Yes, I think I would. They're going to be a tax team probably this summer. They've known all along they were going to go to the tax the year that, or when Evan's contract kicks in. So I guess next year, really. I need to look at the numbers more. I think you really want to avoid that second apron if at all possible, and I don't know where an Okoro contract puts them in relation to that in the years moving forward. But that's right around the threshold, and I think he'll get that. I do think that he'll get that. But if you can get something for him in a sign and trade, sort of how the Cavs landed Strus last year from Miami, I think it depends on the team that wants him, what you could get for him. I don't know, but I think that's right around the neighborhood of where that's right up against the threshold of where you'd feel comfortable.
I am not letting Isaac Okoro walk for nothing. I want to make that very clear.
Yeah.
If a team wants to give him a poison pill contract and offer 4 for $80,
so be it.
So be it. You can't match it, but I'm not letting him walk for anything. But the big number and the big key is what you mentioned. If it puts you close to the second tax apron, Isaac Okoro can't be the reason you went to the second tax apron. Like, that cannot be the contract that separates you from being a first apron to a second apron team. The consequences of being a second apron team are here. Isaac Okoro's value on the court comparatively is here.
Yeah.
And that's not a knock on Isaac, but like, to reach that second apron, you have to be a legitimate guy you can count on in the playoffs because the consequences are severe. Isaac has been good in the last 2 regular seasons, or good last regular season, iffy the year before, postseason non-existent. I am not overpaying, but I'm not letting him walk for nothing.
Yeah, he's gotten better every year. He has.
Yep.
But he was a no-show again in the postseason for the most part this year, and that was really disappointing because I thought he really could have separated himself with a good showing, and it just didn't happen.
And let's get a read-in. We have a producer for this taped edition of the Ultimate Cavs Show, and then we'll get to our what-ifs.
All right, guys, I just want to remind everybody that summertime means baseball, the NBA Finals, and more, and you can bet on it all on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $250. That's $200 that you can use to bet on everything, including the Finals MVP and who's going to hit one out of the park. Visit FanDuel.com/UCSS to add a big win to your summer bucket list. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook.
Thank you, Producer Ant. We're going to get into some what-ifs. We figured, what can we do on a show we're taping a day ahead that won't get scrapped if news breaks? And I figured, let's look at some what-ifs from the Cavs 2023-2024 season and spend a few minutes on each to see how things would have played out if something didn't happen. And our first what-if, Steve. Jason, what if Darius Garland never broke his jaw against the Celtics on December 15th?
I think he probably has a better year than where he wound up. I do think that the jaw played into. I don't think it was the only thing, but I do think it played a role in sort of the struggles that he had this year and the weight that he lost. And it's a traumatic injury. It's not your normal broken wrist, or it impacts everything. When your mouth is wired shut for however many weeks it was, and the amount of weight that he lost, that's going to have a significant impact on you for a long time. So I can't call that the only reason why he struggled, but I do think that it was a significant factor in his year.
Yeah, the injury to Darius and then the subsequent injury to Evan Mobley is what kind of unlocked that 4-out, 1-in big lineup.
Yeah.
Now, Darius would have been part of that if it was just an Evan injury, but I think Darius shot the ball poorly, and that's not going to change. He was not shooting the ball well before injury. He shot it even worse after the injury. But when the NBA started allowing more physical contact, Jason, after the All-Star break, they stopped blowing the whistle as frequently. Darius Garland just seemed like a man in no man's land. He was scared to drive and take contact out of fear he would get hurt again. His shot wasn't falling, so he was scared to rely on the jump shot too much. I do think the jaw injury, while not the only excuse for the reason he was not the caliber of player the Cavs had hoped and anticipated for this season, I do think that was a major factor that kind of gets glossed over a little bit when we look at his season in totality. On the flip side, if he doesn't get injured, we don't ever unlock point guard Donovan. And for a month-long stretch, point guard Donovan was a top 5 player in basketball, and it was the best stretch of basketball he had ever played his entire career. I'm not 100% certain that's sustainable from Donovan over the course of the season, because it puts so much pressure on one guy to not only create for himself but create for others. And the other guys around Donovan in that scenario aren't particularly shot creators in their own right either, which means it all falls on Donovan. But we got a glimpse. And I'm going to tell you, I am fascinated by that glimpse, Jason. And I want to see more of it in spurts next season. So on the one hand, if Darius doesn't break his jaw, he probably has a better season, but we don't get that little tiny teaser of point guard Donovan, which may end up being the best version of Donovan if they can find a running mate at the 2 guard who can also be an off-ball creator and take some of the pressure off him.
The question is, I'm not sure you're going to see that regardless. I don't know. I'm really curious to see how the summer plays out. I know, we've talked about this before, and, my name is on the story. We reported it that if Donovan re-signs, they could try and force Darius out. None of that has happened yet. Donovan hasn't signed a contract. Cavs are telling teams, we're not trading him. We're not breaking this up. And we'll see when push comes to shove if they stay true to that. They don't have to trade him. They don't just because they're trying to push him out or force him out, they don't have to trade him. So it's going to be an interesting summer.
Our second what if. We were told all offseason that Evan Mobley was in the lab working on his jump shot, Jason. So what if Evan Mobley came into the 2023-2024 season with a reliable three-point jump shot? What if?
There would not be any talk about having to break up Jared and Evan. I think that they would fit together a lot better than that, and there wouldn't be a discussion. I mean, Jared was your second-best player last year, and yet and I'm in that camp that believes that you probably should split them up, in large part because the Evans shot hasn't come around the way that we thought that it would. Defensively, he's exactly what you thought he would be. Offensively, it just hasn't gotten there yet. And had he progressed as a shooter, it would open up so much more of the offense. Hell, maybe J.B. Bickerstaff's still the coach of this team, quite frankly. I think part of the reason, I think Donovan was a big reason why J.B.'s no longer here. And I also think the lack of development in Evans' offensive game played a role in that as well. So he could be, and maybe Jared is still here next year. It very well could be. But all the talk around having to split these guys up would dissipate, and J.B. could still be the coach of this team.
I agree with everything you said, but indulge me for a second. Let me go on a magical fantasy ride here of the what if Evan Mobley had a jump shot. If Evan Mobley came into last season as a 36% three-point shooter, Jason, I'm not asking for 40, but I'm not asking for Dirk. I'm not asking for Karl Anthony Towns. I'm saying just a reliable three-point shooter. Evan Mobley's an all-star. Evan Mobley is right on the fringe for an all-NBA caliber player because the list of forwards who made the all-NBA team this season, there were a few spots up for grabs. The combination of Evan Mobley's defense, which we know currently is terrific, with a full bag of offensive weapons, including a three-point shot, which, by the way, if he's making three-point shots, it spreads the defense. That means Darius, Donovan, Jarrett all have more room to operate. It also means defenses can't overload half the court when they're running pick and rolls on one side of the court with Evan and Darius and/or Donovan and Jarrett. And it makes everything look so much better. More importantly than that, Jason, we were promised a unicorn. And I'm not saying that Evan Mobley with a three-point shot would be in the Wemby category. I'm not saying Evan with a reliable three-point shot would even be a top 15 player in the league right now. But instead of being Little Sebastian, which is who Evan Mobley currently is, a very good show pony, but not a unicorn, he'd be a baby rhinoceros. And you'd see the beginning of a hump on the top of his head starting to blossom into what the Cavs told us we were getting when they drafted Evan Mobley 3rd overall. I'm not saying there'd be world peace. I'm not saying it would end world hunger. I'm not saying there'd be no water droughts. I'm not saying bad people would all be admonished. But I am saying if Evan Mobley came into last season with a reliable three-point jump shot, we wouldn't be having 75% of the conversations we are having today about the future of the Cavs roster. Evan Mobley with a three-point jump shot makes the core four work. Evan Mobley with a three-point jump shot makes the Cavs a legitimate threat to beat the Boston Celtics and the Milwaukee Bucks in the Eastern Conference. Evan Mobley with a three-point jump shot means J.B. Bickerstaff probably isn't fired, to your point. And most importantly, Evan Mobley with a three-point jump shot is a guaranteed lock for the rookie max, which he's going to get anyway. But instead of us having the conversation of, we know he's going to get it, but is he really worth it?
Yeah.
It's the question of, we're only getting him for that? What a steal. That is the what if Evan Mobley had a reliable three-point jump shot entered the 2023-2024 season.
I love it.
All right, number 3, Steve. What if, and I believe it's the Donovan Mitchell one, what if Donovan Mitchell, Jason, never hurt his knee in February? And I spelled February wrong, I think. No, I didn't.
No, you got that one right.
It looks wrong every time I see it. But what if he never hurt his knee on that free throw attempt against Chicago? Which then derailed the rest of the season. You want me to start on this one?
Yeah, I don't know. Go ahead. I want to hear what you say. Go ahead.
The month of March was terrible for the Cleveland Cavaliers.
Yeah.
That's where they were riding high, coming off that 19-1 streak. Was it 19-2, 18-2, whatever it was, coming off that hot streak. They roll into the All-Star break. Donovan tweaks his knee. He misses a few games in March. Then Darius, all his shortcomings this season get put under the magnifying glass because he can't hide next to Donovan Mitchell, who just erases so many other mistakes and so many other shortcomings offensively. Evan Mobley, also his offense development, while it did see progress throughout the season, it becomes less of a storyline because they're winning games. Part of the reason these stories become such a big issue is they're losing. And when you win, those stories are non-existent and non-talking points because guess what? There's not a lot to criticize in the moment. You can go big picture in the offseason and talk about it, but in the moment when your team's going 18-2, we don't talk about the fact they played a crappy team almost every night during that 20-game stretch. They played Washington 3 times. They played San Antonio twice. Like, they didn't beat a gauntlet of great teams. But if Donovan doesn't get hurt, that means he's not hurt entering the postseason. So he probably doesn't get hurt against Boston, which gives them a better chance. If he's not injured, they probably don't take Orlando to 7 games. That series is probably wrapped up a little earlier. I still think he was not at 100%, and his inability to continue that scoring outburst on a night-in, night-out basis changes. And although at the end of the day, they got enough from Donovan to beat teams in the playoffs, or at least beat Orlando and compete with Boston, I think a lot of the big questions that came to fruition about J.B. Bickerstaff and the complete makeup and correlation of this team don't ever come to the surface because they're 55 and whatever that would be, Jason. And it's hard to ask a lot of questions in the moment for a team that's on a 57-win pace.
I don't know that anything changes if he doesn't get hurt. And I know that's
interesting.
I know that's wild to say because you think your best player hurts his knee, it derails everything. They still lose to Boston if they're fully healthy. They'll probably beat. You're right. Like they'd probably beat Orlando a little bit easier. But I don't think they're good enough to beat Boston. They still lose to Boston.
If they beat Orlando in 5 and then lose to Boston the way they did, is JB still a coach?
Yeah, no.
It's okay. Still think
He's still going to get fired. I guess the sliding door theory, if you really want to go down it, is do they try and manipulate to get to Orlando if they have a fully healthy Donovan? And I think the answer to that is yes. I think it still plays out the same way.
But what if they're only in that spot because of how poorly they played in March, and the record in March was, I forget the exact number, was not good.
Yeah, they were not good.
If Donovan's healthy, they're probably not even in a situation to try and manipulate that because they probably are the 2 seed in the East. They finished, a game out of the 2 seed, despite a piss-poor March?
I'll actually go the other way, that where the injury could be a good thing. Now, if you're going to take everything Donovan says as true, then this could be a good thing because we had the conversation going back to last season before the loss to the Knicks where I asked him, would you ever punt a game just to send a message? And he said no, that he's got to win every game he plays, and that's where you get into the give me the ball and get out of the way type of mentality that drove me crazy to watch. And then I talked to him toward the end of this season that just ended, and he said, he was dragging his leg up and down the floor in March and saying, I'm not helping anybody here. He kind of came around to what I was saying and said that he agreed and he had lessons to learn too. And yeah, he wants to put Darius in spots where Darius has to win the game for them. And it all sort of stemmed from the knee. So from that aspect, I would say maybe it was a good thing because it forced him to trust guys a little bit more because he couldn't do it. And ultimately, I don't think the season ends any differently. I still think it ends in a loss to Boston, whether it's the conference finals or the second round. Now, if it's the conference finals, maybe JB saves his job in that realm. But for the most part, I know it sounds crazy to say. I don't know that really a whole lot changes.
I just looked at it. If they get the 2 seed, they play Philly in the first round, which actually could have been a worse scenario for the Cavs. So maybe it's actually on the flip side. But if they could have avoided Boston to the third round because they had a better record, who the hell knows? That's why it's a big what if.
Yeah, then maybe it does save JB. Although I still think it comes down to
him versus Donovan.
Him versus Donovan in the end, and which one you're going to pick, and the coach always loses that, and the player always wins.
We have one more what if, then we're going to wrap this up for a special edition of the Ultimate Cavs Show. Jason, what if the Cavs did fire JB after the Knicks series loss instead of letting him coach the team again this season?
I was thinking about this one. Obviously, you have a different coach. It's probably not James Borrego or Kenny Atkinson. I guess it could be. It could have been some of the same names, but it's probably one of the guys from the last hiring cycle. Although I don't think it's Ime Udoka because Houston jumped on that early.
Budenholzer's the biggest name they could have, or Nick Nurse.
I'm not a huge Budenholzer fan. I know he's had some success. I know he won a championship with Milwaukee. I've never been a big fan of his. Maybe it's Nick Nurse. Maybe Nick Nurse is the coach of this team today. I like him better than Budenholzer. Not sold on any. I think a lot of these guys are interchangeable, frankly. It is an interesting what if. I know a lot of people wanted JB fired after last year. I thought he deserved another chance to run it back with a more complete roster. I guess I would say Nick Nurse is probably your head coach today, although I don't.
You don't know if it makes him any better.
Yeah, I don't know if it makes him better, and I don't know if Nick would want this job. I think he walked into a job that he felt was pretty good at the time.
Yeah, I'm going to take the Jason route on this and say I have no freaking clue because it depends on the head coach they hired.
Yeah.
And if you want to go the Nick Nurse route, I do think Nick Nurse is a better coach than JB Bickerstaff. He's won a championship when JB is 1-10 on the road in the playoffs. So, you're picking different options, but I still think the collective unit, if we're doing just this is the singular what if you have 2 non-shooting bigs, you can't win in today's NBA. So I don't think whoever the coach is makes that much of a difference, and that's why I'm so adamant about even if you bring in a Borrego or a Kenny Atkinson, and I did the whole breakdown on Borrego, I still think you have to adjust the roster to reach the goals and the heights you want to reach because I just think philosophically speaking, the construction of this Cavs roster does not meet the modern version of what basketball is today, which is spacing and play creation and shot creation. And the Cavs just frankly don't have enough of that right now.
But would a Nick Nurse, and we're just using him as an example, would he have gotten more out of Evan this year offensively?
I would hope so. I think it's impossible to get less than you got from from Evan just because he was an afterthought in everything. And I know it's a small sample size. I know the Boston series was no Porzingis. I get all that. putting him at the high post and letting him facilitate is his best offensive skill right now.
Yeah.
And it was not at all whatsoever 0.0% in the JB Bickerstaff offensive scheme until it had to be because other people went down. And I think that's the one thing if you want to finger point at what went wrong this year and, hey, what could you have done differently to save your job, JB? It's try and use that as a different look offensively than just the pick and roll variations they had.
Yeah.
And we didn't see it till it was too late. So, yeah, they probably would have got more out of Evan Mobley. But I can't assume he was a jump shooter coming into this season because he wasn't a jump shooter at all.
Right.
And they tried to make that a priority, and he didn't. So, any final thoughts, or are we good to wrap up?
We're
here?
good.
That's going to do it for the Ultimate Cavs Show Juneteenth edition, I guess. June 19th. We'll see you all tomorrow on the Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show. Peace.